There is a fermented Japanese paste that cuts stroke mortality by 26% across 40,000 adults, and most Westerners walk right past it. Number 6 has been approved as an adjunct to chemotherapy in Japan since the 1980s. This isn't a trend list. It's a 1,000-year-old anti-inflammatory system encoded into daily meals. Number 1 delivers 137 times more of its key antioxidant than ordinary steeped green tea. Number 10 is umeboshi, wrinkled, ruby-red pickled plums so sour they lock your jaw on the first bite. For over 1,000 years, umeboshi has been treated as both food and medicine in Japan. Samurai carried them into battle during the Sengoku period to stave off fatigue, and feudal-era doctors prescribed them for hangovers, nausea, and food poisoning. Travelers packed them into bento boxes because the fruit's extreme acidity helped preserve rice and suppress bacteria in an era without refrigeration. Edo period physicians recommended umeboshi tea for fever, and merchants traveling long distances carried the plums as a portable antiseptic. The Hinomaru bento, a single red umeboshi on a bed of white rice, mimicking the Japanese flag, wasn't decoration. It was a working microbial defense system. Modern research has caught up. Umeboshi contains exceptionally high levels of citric acid, polyphenols, and a lignan called syringaresinol. A 2011 study published in Molecular Medicine Reports showed that umeboshi extract inhibited the growth of Helicobacter pylori, the bacterium behind most stomach ulcers and a major driver of chronic gastric inflammation. Separate Japanese research has found that syringaresinol reduces inflammatory cytokines like interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha in vascular cells, meaning it calms the exact inflammation that stiffens arteries. A randomized trial on older adults with hypertension linked daily umeboshi consumption to reduce systolic blood pressure over 8 weeks. The practical move is simple. Look for traditional shiozuke umeboshi, fermented only with sea salt and red shiso leaves. Skip the bright red supermarket versions loaded with food coloring and corn syrup. Those are candy, not medicine. 1 plum in the morning with a cup of green tea or pressed into a bowl of plain rice delivers the functional dose that Japanese grandmothers have quietly relied on for generations. It is sour enough to wake up every salivary gland you have, which is, as it happens, exactly the point. At number 9, we turn to shiso, the serrated aromatic perilla leaf that sits under sashimi and tints umeboshi its signature color. Shiso has been part of Japanese cuisine and kampo medicine since at least the Heian period, where it was valued for clearing what traditional practitioners called damp heat, the category for seasonal allergies, skin eruptions, and bronchial congestion. Rural households grew it beside doorways, partly because of superstition about warding off illness, partly because it genuinely worked against the humid summer complaints of farming regions. In traditional kampo, dried shiso leaf is still used today as a component of the classic Saiboku-to prescription for cough and bronchial tightness. Red shiso is the ingredient that turns umeboshi its deep crimson through a natural pigment reaction, and green shiso flavors tempura, sushi, and pickles across the country. The science is unusually strong for a culinary herb. Shiso leaves are loaded with rosmarinic acid, luteolin, and paraldehyde, 3 compounds that consistently reduce histamine release and block inflammatory signaling in lab studies. A randomized, placebo-controlled trial published in Experimental Biology and Medicine gave rosmarinic acid from perilla extract to patients with seasonal allergic rhinitis and found significant reductions in itchy eyes, runny nose, and inflammatory cell infiltration within 3 weeks. Separate Japanese research on asthma models showed that perilla oil, rich in alpha-linolenic acid, suppressed leukotriene production, the same inflammatory messengers targeted by prescription asthma drugs. Additional work has linked luteolin from shiso to meaningful reductions in cyclooxygenase 2, one of the central enzymes driving chronic pain and swelling. In practice, this is one of the easiest anti-inflammatory foods to integrate because it tastes like a cross between basil, mint, and anise. Wrap slices of cucumber in raw shiso leaves, tear them into soba noodles, or blend the leaves into a quick pesto with toasted sesame. Fresh leaves carry the strongest essential oils. Dried shiso loses most of the paraldehyde that makes the plant pharmacologically interesting in the first place. Slipping into number 8, we have nori, those papery dark green sheets wrapped around onigiri and sushi. Long before sushi became a global export, coastal Japanese communities harvested wild porphyra seaweed off the rocks of Tokyo Bay and the Sea, drying it into sheets as early as the 8th century. The Taiho Code, a legal document from the year 701, listed nori as an acceptable form of tax payment, which tells you how valuable it was. Buddhist monks used it as a staple protein source during fasting periods, and fishing villages relied on it during lean winters. During the Heian period, powdered nori was even incorporated into imperial banquet dishes, where guests prized its glossy black sheen against plain rice. Here is what researchers now know. Nori contains a sulfated polysaccharide called porphyrin, which has been shown in cell and animal studies to suppress the NF-kappa B pathway, the master switch for chronic inflammation linked to everything from arthritis to cardiovascular disease. A 2014 paper in Food and Chemical Toxicology reported that porphyrin extracted from porphyra significantly reduced markers of oxidative stress and inflammatory mediators in induced colitis models. Nori is also one of the few non-animal sources of bioavailable vitamin B12, a nutrient whose deficiency is directly tied to elevated homocysteine and systemic vascular inflammation. It carries taurine, magnesium, and a surprising dose of EPA, the anti-inflammatory omega-3 more commonly associated with fatty fish. The catch is quality. Industrially produced nori used in cheap sushi is often bleached and stored in ways that degrade its polysaccharides. Look for deep, almost black sheets labeled yaki nori or nori from Japanese producers, and aim for a single sheet a few times a week, enough to get meaningful porphyrin without pushing iodine intake too high. Crumble it into miso soup, wrap it around brown rice, or eat it plain, the way generations of Japanese children have eaten it as an after-school snack. Number 7 pulls us underground to gobo, burdock root, the long, woody, soil-colored vegetable that looks more like a tree branch than a food. Gobo is so central to Japanese cooking that it has its own dedicated dishes, most famously kinpira gobo, a simmered soy-glazed side that appears in home kitchens and bento boxes across the country. Traditional Japanese medicine, heavily influenced by Chinese kampo, has used burdock for more than 1,000 years to cool the blood and treat skin inflammation, sore throats, and joint swelling. Zen monks included it in Shojin Ryori temple cuisine because it was considered grounding and purifying. Modern pharmacology confirms much of the old framing. Burdock root is rich in 2 lignans, arctein and arctiginin, and a prebiotic fiber called inulin. Research published in the Journal of Biological Chemistry demonstrated that arctiginin potently inhibits the production of inflammatory mediators including nitric oxide, prostaglandin E2, and the cytokines IL-1 beta and IL-6 in macrophages. A 2014 randomized controlled trial in clinical nutrition tested burdock root tea in patients with knee osteoarthritis and found significant reductions in C-reactive protein, malondialdehyde, and other inflammatory and oxidative stress markers over 6 weeks. Beyond the lignans, the inulin in gobo feeds short-chain fatty acid-producing bacteria like Faecalibacterium prausnitzi, which in turn dampen gut inflammation at the source. Gobo also contains chlorogenic acid, the same polyphenol studied in coffee for vascular protection, which adds another layer to its circulatory effects. To use it, look for firm, unblemished roots at Japanese or Korean grocers. Scrub, don't peel, because most of the active compounds sit in the outer layer. Shave it into matchsticks, soak briefly to reduce bitterness, then stir-fry with sesame oil, soy sauce, mirin, and a pinch of chili. You can also steep dried burdock as a tea, which is how the knee osteoarthritis trial administered it. Earthy, slightly sweet, genuinely filling. Gobo is one of those foods that quietly does heavy pharmacological work. That brings us to number 6, shiitake, the umami-dense mushroom cultivated on oak logs in Japan's forested mountains for over 1,000 years. The earliest written record of shiitake cultivation comes from the Song dynasty. But Japan formalized the log inoculation method during the Muromachi period and turned shiitake into a serious agricultural industry. Shiitake was historically reserved for aristocrats and temples. It appeared in the elaborate tea ceremony kaiseki meal, prized for flavor and for its reputation as a longevity food. Japanese folk medicine recommended dried shiitake broth for recovery from illness, weakness, and what we would today call chronic low-grade inflammation. The scientific backing here is unusually deep. Shiitake contains lentinan, a beta-glucan so well studied that it has been used as an adjunct cancer therapy in Japan since the 1980s, approved by the Ministry of Health for that exact purpose. Beyond oncology, clinical research has shown that regular shiitake consumption improves immune cell profiles and lowers several inflammatory markers in healthy adults. A 2015 study from the University of Florida tracked subjects who ate 4 ounces of shiitake daily for 4 weeks and measured significant improvements in T-cell function, alongside reduced indicators of systemic inflammation. Shiitake also produces aretadenine, a compound shown in Japanese research to lower LDL cholesterol by modifying phospholipid metabolism, a direct mechanism against the vascular dysfunction that precedes heart disease. Fresh shiitake additionally supplies ergothioneine, a sulfur-containing amino acid that accumulates in cells exposed to oxidative stress and is often nicknamed the body's longevity antioxidant. Practically, dried shiitake is more potent than fresh. The drying process concentrates beta-glucans and activates ergosterol into vitamin D2 when exposed to sunlight. Soak dried shiitake in cold water overnight, then use both the rehydrated mushrooms and the soaking liquid. That dark, earthy broth is the foundation of classic dashi. A small handful a few times a week delivers the dose used in most clinical studies, turning an ordinary pot of soup into functional medicine. Number 5 is where fermentation gets stranger. Natto, fermented soybeans bound together in sticky, stringy threads that challenge almost every first-time Western eater. Natto has a 1,000-year history in Japan, with origin stories tracing it to samurai who noticed that boiled soybeans packed into rice straw bags fermented overnight into something edible and, crucially, energizing. By the Edo period, natto was sold on the streets of Tokyo and Kyoto as a cheap breakfast that kept laborers going through the morning. Farmers in Ibaraki and Akita prefectures built regional reputations around the best natto strains. And Mito in Ibaraki is still considered the spiritual capital of natto, with shops there fermenting batches using methods refined over hundreds of years. The compound that made natto famous in modern research is nattokinase, an enzyme produced by Bacillus subtilis during fermentation. A 2015 randomized, double-blind trial published in Integrated Blood Pressure Control gave nattokinase supplementation to adults with hypertension and documented a meaningful drop in systolic blood pressure over 8 weeks, along with improvements in fibrinogen, a clotting protein that doubles as an inflammatory marker. Separate research has shown that nattokinase breaks down fibrin, reducing blood viscosity and easing the low-grade vascular inflammation associated with thick, sluggish blood flow. Natto is also one of the richest food sources of vitamin K2 in the MK7 form, which directs calcium away from arteries and into bones. Japanese prefectures with the highest natto consumption consistently show lower rates of cardiovascular mortality, a correlation that has survived adjustment for confounders in large prospective studies. The practical path is simple if you can handle the texture. Traditional natto is eaten at breakfast, stirred vigorously until it develops a silky foam, then mixed with soy sauce, mustard, and green onion, and spooned over hot rice. A 40-gram pack a few times a week is the Japanese norm and the dose associated with cardiovascular benefit. At number 4, we meet real wasabi, Wasabia japonica, not the neon green paste made from horseradish and food coloring that passes for wasabi in most sushi restaurants outside Japan. Authentic wasabi is a slow-growing semi-aquatic plant that takes up to 2 years to mature and needs cold, flowing mountain stream water to thrive. It has been cultivated in Shizuoka Prefecture since at least the Azuchi Momoyama period, where legend credits a local farmer with presenting wasabi to Tokugawa Ieyasu, who was so impressed he restricted its cultivation to the shogunate. Shizuoka growers still harvest wasabi by hand from gravel-bedded streams, a slow agricultural ritual that hasn't changed in 4 centuries. Wasabi was grated onto raw fish not just for flavor, but because it was understood to suppress the microbial growth that caused food poisoning in an era before refrigeration. The active compounds, called isothiocyanates, include one particularly studied molecule known as 6-MSITC, 6-methyl-sulfonyl-hexyl isothiocyanate. Research from Shizuoka University and other Japanese institutions has shown that 6-MSITC activates the NRF2 pathway, a master regulator that upregulates the body's own antioxidant and anti-inflammatory genes. A 2023 study in the journal Nutrients reported that older adults given wasabi extract daily showed improved working and episodic memory, with the authors attributing the effect to reduced neuroinflammation. Additional Japanese research has documented that real wasabi suppresses platelet aggregation, inhibits tumor cell proliferation in gastric cell lines, and downregulates the inflammatory transcription factor AP1. The catch, again, is that all of this applies to the real plant. Horseradish-based imitations contain none of the sulfonyl compounds responsible. Finding genuine wasabi outside Japan is difficult, but not impossible. Fresh rhizomes are sold by a handful of specialty growers. Frozen grated wasabi from Shizuoka is a reasonable second choice. Grate a small amount on a sharkskin board, let it sit for 2 minutes, then use it within 15 minutes. A pea-sized daily dose is the culturally authentic and pharmacologically meaningful amount. Sliding into number 3 is miso, the fermented soybean paste that defines the savory backbone of Japanese cooking. Miso has been produced in Japan since at least the 7th century, when it arrived from China and was refined into dozens of regional styles. For centuries, it was a tax commodity, a military ration, and a monastery staple. Buddhist temples in Kyoto developed their own fermentation strains, aging miso for 3 to 5 years in cedar barrels and using it as both medicine and meal. Traditional Japanese doctors prescribed miso soup for radiation exposure long before that recommendation was tested in the aftermath of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where hospital reports from Dr. Shinichiro Akizuki documented unusually low radiation sickness among staff who drank daily miso soup. The inflammation science is remarkable. Miso contains genistein and didzine, isoflavones that bind estrogen receptors and downregulate inflammatory gene expression, along with melanoidins produced during long fermentation that scavenge free radicals. A landmark 2003 study by the National Cancer Center of Japan followed over 40,000 adults for more than a decade and found that women consuming 3 or more bowls of miso soup daily had a 40% lower risk of breast cancer compared to those drinking less than 1 bowl. Subsequent cohort work has linked daily miso intake to reduce stroke mortality by as much as 26%, driven in part by reductions in vascular inflammation despite miso's sodium content, a paradox now attributed to its potassium, isoflavones, and probiotic peptides. To get the benefit, the rule is simple but strict. Never boil miso. High heat destroys the live Aspergillus oryzae cultures and degrades the heat-sensitive peptides responsible for much of its activity. Whisk unpasteurized miso into hot, not boiling, dashi at the very end of cooking. Add tofu and wakame, and drink a bowl first thing in the morning, the way Japanese households have done for more than a millennium. Number 2 is kombu, the thick dark green kelp harvested off Hokkaido's northern coast and sun-dried into the dense salt-dusted sheets that form the foundation of Japanese dashi. Kombu has been central to Japanese cuisine since at least the Nara period, when it traveled south along the Kitamai trade routes from Ainu fishing communities in Hokkaido to the imperial court in Kyoto. It was so valuable that it functioned as currency in some coastal regions and was offered as ceremonial tribute. Hokkaido harvesters still pull kombu from the sea with long hooked poles, laying the fronds on gravel beaches to dry in the sun. In 1908, Tokyo Imperial University chemist Kikunai Ikeda identified kombu's glutamate as the source of umami, the savory fifth taste, founding an entire field of food science. What Ikeda didn't know was how pharmacologically loaded kombu actually is. Kombu contains fucoidan, a complex sulfated polysaccharide that has become one of the most intensively studied marine compounds in anti-inflammatory research. A 2020 meta-analysis in marine drugs concluded that fucoidan significantly lowers key inflammatory proteins across conditions including rheumatoid arthritis and inflammatory bowel disease. Kombu also supplies fucoxanthin, a carotenoid shown in Japanese clinical work to reduce visceral fat and improve liver enzyme markers linked to hepatic inflammation. Its alginate fibers bind heavy metals and inflammatory bile acids in the gut, pulling them out of circulation. Add the fact that kombu is one of the densest natural sources of iodine, essential for thyroid-mediated control of inflammation. And the daily Japanese practice of simmering kombu for dashi starts to look like a multi-pathway pharmacy. Use it the traditional way. Wipe, don't rinse, a palm-sized piece of kombu with a damp cloth, then cold soak it in water for an hour before slow heating to just below a simmer. Remove before boiling to preserve the flavor and the fukoidan. That single broth base can season soups, grains, and vegetables for an entire week. And that delivers us to number 1, matcha, the stone-ground, vibrant green powdered tea central to Japanese tea culture since the 12th century. The Zen monk Eisai brought tea seeds and the powdered tea method from Song Dynasty China to Japan in 1191, planting them at Kozanji Temple and founding what became Japanese green tea. Sen no Rikyu codified matcha's preparation in the 16th century into chado, the way of tea, a ritual where every motion, from water temperature to the weight of the bowl, became meditation. Samurai drank matcha before battle for calm focus, and Zen monks drank it during long zazen sessions for the same reason. Unlike steeped tea, where you discard the leaves, matcha means you consume the whole leaf, which is why it delivers a completely different pharmacological dose. Modern research has turned matcha into one of the most studied anti-inflammatory beverages on Earth. A widely cited analysis in the Journal of Chromatography A found that matcha contains up to 137 times more EGCG than steeped green tea. EGCG is the compound behind most of matcha's effects. A 2018 meta-analysis in Medicine pooled randomized trials and concluded that catechins significantly reduce systemic inflammatory markers across human studies. EGCG inhibits NF-kappa B, the same master inflammatory switch touched earlier on this list, but through a different molecular mechanism. Matcha also delivers roughly 5 times more L-theanine than regular green tea, an amino acid shown in Japanese clinical work to lower cortisol and the systemic inflammation that chronic stress produces. Its chlorophyll and rutin add further antioxidant layers. Buy ceremonial-grade matcha from a named Japanese producer with Uji, Nishio, or Yame as the benchmarks. Sift 1 gram into a warm bowl. Pour 60 milliliters of water at 80 degrees Celsius and whisk in a quick W motion until a fine foam forms. 1 bowl in the morning, taken slowly, is the dose that generations of monks, samurai, and tea masters chose, and that current research keeps validating. Across 1,000 years, Japanese kitchens built an anti-inflammatory system that modern labs are only starting to catalog. From the sourness of umeboshi to the green foam of matcha, every item on this list earns its place through tradition, chemistry, and consistent clinical backing. Which one surprised you most? The nattokinase research at number 5, or the miso cohort data at number 3? Drop it in the comments, like the video, and subscribe for the next culture we cover.